Hello everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be talking about some research I found about dating apps. And I know a few of you all really enjoy it when I do these videos where I deep dive into research or a paper and explain it. I am definitely not a professional researcher by any means, but I have to admit I have been on a little bit of a kick lately researching the manosphere and red pillars and incels for a bigger project I am working on. I don't know if by the time you guys are seeing this video, if that bigger project will be out yet, or maybe you all will have to wait in anticipation for that bigger project, but subscribe if you want to see that in the future. But one thing I found while I was researching all of that didn't really fit into that bigger thing I was working on was a study I found about incels and dating apps. And as a dating app user, I definitely want to know what is going on with incels on dating apps, how they use it, their impressions of it, if it contributes to or reinforces their worldview in any meaningful way, like maybe if there's some kind of influence directly where like dating apps are leading people to become incels, like that seems very relevant to me and I want to know more about that. So we're going to be looking at some research about incels. We're going to be going over it. I'm going to give my thoughts about it, what I would assume would happen with incels on dating apps before we read the study, and then actually what the study shows. And then I also want to talk about what I think this means and what further research we are going to need to do in the future to answer some more additional questions. And the title of this particular study is quite the mouthful. It is called An Exploratory Study of Incels, Dating App Experiences, Mental Health, and Relational Well-Being. And this was published in the Journal of Sex Research at the beginning of September of 2023. Rather than taking the typical approach of analyzing the content posted in incel private community groups, this study instead wanted to look directly at the lived experiences of incels through the vein of dating apps. The study's author, Brandon Sparks of Kingston University, had this to say when asked about why he wanted to conduct this study. I began my first incel study in 2019, and at the time, I was frustrated by the lack of research on incels. They were certainly prevalent enough in the news, and it became the most authoritative source on incels. But I suspect it may not be painting the most nuanced or helpful picture. I wondered whether their sudden rise, or at least the public's sudden notice of them, was due to dating apps, which can be very convenient, but can also result in a lot of rejection in a very short period of time. At the end of the day, I thought incels deserved someone to study them from a more sympathetic angle. Rejection is tough to deal with, repeated rejection even more so, and stigmatizing them isn't going to help anybody. And frankly, he's right. We do have this common image of an incel being somebody who is an angry, lonely, younger man that is a danger to society in general and to women in particular. But just because we have that idea in our heads doesn't necessarily mean that incels aren't worthy of a sympathetic lens of analysis, and that we shouldn't look at what their experiences are and how those experiences influence their emotions. After all, one of the biggest gripes the manosphere has about society, about women as well, is that, well, we don't take men's issues seriously. We don't care about the numbers for this thing. We don't care about these things going on here. We don't study them. We don't talk about them. We don't center them ever. And so clearly they don't care. So conducting scientific research from a neutral perspective about the experiences of people like this on dating apps, that seems like a pretty concrete way to prove, hey, we do actually care about these issues. Now, never mind the fact that academic research has long concerned itself with men's issues, and even in feminist literature, there is much talk of how the patriarchy negatively affects men. So, all gas pour, the feminists do really talk about men. But I think maybe some more modern stuff, looking at incels, is worthwhile because a lot of the existing research is just based on looking at their private groups and the way they talk to each other, which is maybe different from how they experience things on a private individual level. So I like that we're moving in maybe a little bit of a different direction for once. And before I get into the study itself, I do want to talk a little bit about what my thoughts were before reading the study, just so I can stay honest about what my ideas were, what my bias was going into this research, because I have been thinking about incels in the manosphere a lot. This has been percolating in the back of my head, as I like to say, for a while. And I was thinking about incels and dating apps, and like so much manosphere content is about like getting women and using dating apps and like Tinder and women on Instagram. And I was like, okay, what is going on here? Like, what is happening? I'm hearing so many complaints about dating apps and women these days, and I'm like, okay, what's happening? What's going on here? And I had assumed, because incel ideology is very closely related to the rest of the manosphere, they probably had similar ideas about women. You know, women being hypergamous, and women being flaky, and women tricking beta males while actually choosing alpha males, and all of that kind of rhetoric would probably be part of what would influence them on dating apps. Like, a lot of the manosphere influencers will talk about how like women aren't worth it, women deserve less, and that creates a worldview where like you treat women like crap because that's what they really deserve. And a lot of people that are in this will consistently think that like, oh, even women that are like really unattractive, they only ever want to go for like the Chad alpha 10s or whatever. And I had never really seen them talk positively about like women they found attractive, because so much of their worldview is focused on like, frankly, just like hating women and tearing women down. And like, even when you see like these beautiful women that are on like these podcasts and are on Instagram, like posing with these people, like they'll still call them like ugly, fat, you know, too tall, mannish, whatever, like go down the list. They'll like do anything they can to like physically tear these women down. So I assumed it was likely that manosphere people and incels probably all like just had really picky standards for women. Like they were like, oh no, a woman, she has to be like, she has to be like at least this weight, like she can't be heavier than that, she has to be this tall and no taller, and she has to have this hair, and it has to be long, and it has to be healthy, and like, you know, she can go to school, but like she can't be more educated than I am, and if she has a job, it can't be better than my job, and she can't make more money than me, and like she has to be a virgin or have a really low body count, and her, you know, she has to have, you know, a body shape like this, and she has to have boobs like this and a butt like this, and just run down the list of like every single possible thing you could like ever be picky about. And of course, goes without saying, you know, no liberal women, no feminists, no women with a gender studies degree, no pink hair, no dyed hair, no piercings, no tattoos, like no one that looks like too liberal, too feminist, too SJW, all the horror, like can't have any of that stuff going on. And, you know, no women with like stupid girly hobbies, right? If you're a woman and you're too into like knitting or crochet, out. You're not allowed to have your own hobbies or like be into them too much. You can't also have like a man's job, because then you're like stealing a job from a man. So if you work on an oil rig, or if you're a programmer, sorry, you should just quit and just make room for a man to take your job, because don't you know men have to be the ones to like earn for a family and earn for the household. You know, no women over 40. Gotta even talk about age yet, right? It's a big one too. You know, can't have women that are too old. You know, ideally, you know, younger if possible, right? So like probably if you're like looking at like a 25-year-old incel, he's probably ideally looking for like 18 to 20, but then like maybe he'd be willing to accept up to like 28 if he was like truly desperate. And, you know, no women that have been divorced, no women that have had long-term boyfriends before, no women that have had kids, like none of that stuff. Like, oh God, just the list goes on and on of like stuff that would be disqualifying, supposedly, for a lot of manosphere people. So I assumed that like, basically, if you were a woman that would make Sargon of Akkad upset, which is most women, you would be disqualified from the dating pool. So I assumed that incels and manosphere people, their dating app experiences were because they had been brain rotted by social media, and then on dating apps they just like, they would be willing to match with people because they know how to play the game, but they weren't genuinely really interested in pursuing communication with women that didn't meet a certain standard of what they thought they needed to date in order to get respect from their peers, from other men, because like, oh, well, like, you know, the only thing worse than being ugly yourself is having an ugly girlfriend. So, you know, yeah, that's what I assumed was going on there. Because of their fixation on being able to have sex, they probably were primarily looking for sex and like really pushing towards that, not really relationships. Maybe that was affecting what they were doing on dating apps and their success on them. But again, put a pin in it. We will see if that bears out to be true in the research, in the data. Because surprisingly, didn't necessarily actually go that way in the research. The study included a relatively small sample size. It included 38 self-identified incels, as well as 107 non-incels that were recruited from the University of Saskatchewan. And they had people essentially fill out a survey, and generally everyone had similar levels of education. They were in a similar age range of being around sort of the average in the mid-20s. They were predominantly heterosexual, and surprising to me, predominantly neutral in their political opinions. I do wonder how they evaluated that. Like, did they ask people, like, do you identify as, like, a liberal, a conservative, or like a libertarian, or like neutral, like no party? Like, it depends on how they ask that, because I don't imagine they did like an independent like data set on like trying to figure out somebody's political leanings versus their self-stated political leanings. So interesting. Neutral is, I was expecting conservative. So okay, apparently on average we are leaning neutral in this group. And then how they assess this is they did basically a set of surveys and questionnaires where each group was evaluated with like probably like half a dozen. I think there was a bunch of them in the study. There were multiple different scales, questionnaires, and they had so many different purposes. They were looking at things like self-esteem and depression symptoms and rejection sensitivity and attachment and dating anxiety, and also their use of dating apps and what that looked like to see if there were any correlations or commonalities between the groups and their score ranges on these different questionnaires, and then how they used dating apps. One important thing to note about this study, as far as I can tell, is all of the information gathered for this study was based on the recollections of the participants in the study rather than being independently collected by the people doing the research. So when they ask questions about like, how many photos do you have? What types of photos do you have? How often do you message people? That wasn't based on the survey researchers scrubbing through people's dating app data. That was based on, as far as I can tell, self-reports from the people in the dating app. So keep that in mind, because that could definitely flavor the outcome of the results from this study. And I would have maybe preferred to see people use like maybe some kind of log system, or maybe some kind of ethical way of like gathering app data, like just things to increase the accuracy overall, because obviously if you are recalling your experience on a dating app, it is possible that maybe your negative experiences of using the app would cause you to like underestimate certain things or overestimate certain things, and that's going to like flavor the outcome of the data, and then really be more about the mindset of the people using the apps versus the apps themselves. But what did this study actually end up showing? It did show that incels are more likely to have insecure attachment styles and have higher sensitivity to rejection. They were more likely to be fearful of being single and more likely to base their self-esteem on their relationship, while also having lower self-esteem overall. The research also showed large differences in how incels versus non-incels used the apps and how much success they had. Incels were more likely to have a bio, but much less likely to have group photos or photos with friends. So they, for example, had these photos at a rate of 17.9% versus 52.3%. That is a very big spread there. Incels also reported they were on the apps for more months, were more likely to pay for premium features, and they were less likely to link to their social media accounts on their profile. If they did have a match, which was less common than with non-incels at only 8.37% of the time versus 25.75% of the time, they also reported the other person initiated a conversation only 3.44% of the time, compared to 22.88% with non-incels. None of the 38 incels in this research study indicated that they had started a relationship as a result of being on a dating app. Also, only 13 out of the 38 incels in this research group indicated they had gone on even just a date as a result of being on the dating app, and 5 indicated that they had had sex as a result of being on the dating app. And I think that raises some questions for me about identifying as being an incel, because I would imagine some people would say, oh, you've had sex at all with a willing participant, presumably, therefore you were no longer an incel because in the recent past you have had sex with somebody. and therefore you are no longer an incel. But also, if these people aren't finding relationships and aren't finding long-term dating partners, I can see how they would continue to identify as an incel, because maybe like a one-off, one-night stand doesn't really like count for them, for example. Or maybe it's more about the fact they can't find people to go on dates with, and when it does happen, it's super, super rare, and it feels like it's like a drop of water in a dry desert. And so maybe that's more what is connected to the incel ideology. But at some point, I imagine, you do have to say, okay, I'm no longer an incel because, like, you know, I'm getting dates twice a week and I'm hooking up like a couple times a month. Therefore, no longer an incel. Would love to see research about former incels in particular, and either what led to that or their behavior on dating apps versus like current incels. See if maybe we can suss out some differences between those two groups. But I think that's something that was really telling with this, is that incels self-reported that they were more likely to use these dating apps for the explicit purpose of finding a serious relationship, whereas the comparatively more successful non-incels were primarily using it for, quote, entertainment. Which, is it like, are the dates entertaining, or is using the app itself entertainment? Because dating apps, especially things like Tinder, have been totally gamified. Swiping away on profiles, it is essentially the same thing as playing Candy Crush. And I think so far, this roughly sounds like what I expected. Like, I was surprised by the dating part of it, because I thought that incels would not really be into dating. I assumed because a lot of the more prolific incels are very, like, anti-women and hate women and like just want revenge on them, basically, that they would look at it more as a game to get to sex and then not really be looking for a serious relationship. So that is interesting to me, that like so many were at least saying they were looking for a serious relationship. But in terms of incels being people that have more depressive symptoms and they feel more anxious and they tie their self-worth and self-esteem to having a relationship, that all definitely tracks for me. I totally understand where that would be coming from, especially in terms of like social isolation. This is a wild theory and interpretation that I have, but looking at how big the number difference is percentage-wise between incels that have profile pictures that include friends and other people compared to non-incels, to me that indicates like, oh, that is potentially a really big indicator of social isolation. Not having friends to take pictures with, not having social media that you're proud of and you want to share because it reflects who you are. Like, I think there's maybe a level of like self-consciousness there with sharing social media potentially, but then also like not having people in your life around you close enough to be able to take photos with them out and about doing things. So I think that potentially has some interesting implications there, but also sort of reinforces what I assumed maybe going into reading this research. But what was really fascinating to me reading this research is I expected going into this that incels were going to have very narrow parameters for who they were looking for on dating apps as like an acceptable partner, and maybe they were really judgmental about like age or body size, and that was leading them to kind of just be in this self-perpetuating loop of being an incel because, well, they can't find partners, but they can't find a partner because they're too strict, but then, like, you know, that would just keep going and going and going. That is not actually seemingly what is happening according to the data in this research. Incels actually have broader parameters for people they are willing to interact with and match with on dating apps. They were open to matches from a broader geographical range as well as a wider age range. And I wish this study had collected more specific data, because I really want to go down into this more. Like, is it just about age and geographical location? Like, what about things like weight, like religion, like body type, like height, like education level? Like, there are so many other things that, at least on like a lot of dating apps, like on OkCupid, are very easy to find and pull from a profile. Did that have any correlation for people? And also I want to know, like, just because they have broader parameters and they are saying yes to more people in terms of matching, does that translate into having serious conversations with these people? Or is it sort of like, oh, I'm just kind of doing it to do it, but I'm not really super into them, kind of saying like, you know, oh, hey, what's up, like, okay type message? Like, how sincere are the messages they are sending out. Well, now that I've talked about it, what does all this research actually mean? That incels presented with greater depressive symptoms and dating anxiety, as well as lower levels of self-esteem and secure attachment, is perhaps not surprising, given their disappointing attempts in the dating sphere, which may be exacerbated by their greater fear of being single, rejection sensitivity, and relationship contingent self-esteem. These results highlight clinically relevant areas for intervention among mental health practitioners who may count incels among their client base. Further work exploring the mechanisms behind the transitions in and out of inceldom is needed. Basically, until we have more data, we're not going to know which part of this problem is the chicken and which part is the egg. Could it be that it's people that have self-esteem issues and anxiety issues and attachment issues are going on dating apps and having a bad time because that is bleeding through into their profiles and how they talk to people? Or is it that people that maybe already have a normal baseline or like maybe slightly deviated from average baseline are going on dating apps and then having like a mental health spiral because of how terrible using dating apps can be? They are just being rejected over and over and over and over again, and that takes minor issues and blows them out of proportion and leads them in a negative direction. I would love to know about this. I don't think we're going to necessarily have a definitive answer. I think it's very rare that it would ever be one or the other, not both. Like in psychology, it's pretty much always both. Like if you're like, oh, is it nature or nurture? The answer is both almost every single time. But I would like to know maybe what direction is more prominent for incels, seeing how that compares to like non-incels with like attachment issues or anxiety issues, or non-incels in general, like of any mental health profile. Doing more research in that area I think could be very telling. One thing I was thinking about while looking at this study was, have I seen incels on dating apps? What are their profiles like? Because maybe that would give us some insight into, okay, is this happening because of just like something innately about incels is wrong and we can sense it? Or is it like something in their profiles, how they talk, how they approach? Is it obvious from the outside when you're looking at like an incel dating app profile? And I have a unique experience with this because of the dating apps I choose to use. So I use OkCupid and Field. I've talked about this a lot. OkCupid, a little bit more old school, you could say. Longer profiles, more information on the profiles. And the thing I love about OkCupid is they have a match percentage feature. So you answer a bunch of questions, like hundreds of them. You get a very robust sense of who you are and who other people are. And then they weight those scores and then they match up with people, at least in the match percentage category now, with people that have a higher percentage of matching with you. This is kind of like, I guess, sort of like a backdoor into like a quicker algorithm for swiping on people, because like supposedly you want people that you like agree with major issues on. But I found it to be very useful for finding people that I am compatible with. I basically don't use any of the other categories on OkCupid. I only ever go to match percentage. And I pretty much stay at like 90% or higher. Like I don't go below that because I find the quality drops off pretty quickly. But 90+%, I don't think I've ever like seen incels on OkCupid. Like it just, I've seen maybe a couple of profiles where people seem to be very like aggressive or very obviously like going through a mental health struggle of some kind, but not in an incel way. And I don't know why that is. So on OkCupid, I haven't seen anything. Field is a dating app mostly intended for non-monogamous folks, swingers, kinky people, things like that. And I think that is so niche that incels are not really like going for that. Also, I cannot imagine a worse relationship style for an incel than an open relationship. Like I think that would just be very bad. Would not recommend incels go on Field at all. So I think I just used the wrong apps to really see a lot of incel dating profiles. I'm sure they exist. I think especially on things like maybe like Bumble, Hinge, Tinder, the more kind of younger set dating apps, the more like swipe focused apps. I think you're probably going to see more on there. And I mean, there's all kinds of cringe Twitter accounts and like TikTok people that like they just troll through like cringy dating app profiles and like talk about them. So clearly they exist out there. I just haven't like seen too many of them myself. And I think knowing that, I wonder, like, because I haven't seen very many like explicitly I can tell this is an incel dating profile, like what does that mean about how they use an app? Because I really, really think there could be a huge gap here between what self-reported data shows and what collected data shows from the researchers. And I talked about this at the beginning of the video. I think there is a potential that if you are asking people retrospectively, like, take us through a year on a dating app, what was it like? How many people did you talk to? How many dates did you go on? Did you have sex? What did you use it for? What pictures did you have? Like, who sent you messages? Like, how often did that happen? If you have a bad time using an app, and you already feel down about yourself and have low self-esteem and you don't really like women and your worldview tells you this is inevitably going to happen, everything in retrospect is going to seem worse, or you are going to influence it to have a bad outcome subconsciously because you don't really think you actually deserve to have a relationship or deserve to have people like you, and so you sabotage yourself. So it could be that either the self-reporting is colored with like the opposite of rose-colored glasses, like black-colored glasses, because it's a sort of black pill, I guess. Like, you could have it be, okay, we're going in, and we're having a really bad time, and it was awful, it was horrible, but then, like, really maybe in reality, if you could actually monitor their activity on a dating app in real time, non-obtrusively, you might see they actually have more success than what they are reporting upon. It could also be that the way that their worldview influences them and the community and culture they're a part of influences them, that they take that into how they interact with other people on dating apps in terms of how they talk about themselves in profiles or in their messages, and that could be a really big turnoff for people. Like, when I don't swipe on a profile, even if they like have the markers of somebody that I would typically be into, if I see that they seem very angry, very jaded, if they seem to be really in the middle of a struggle and maybe shouldn't really be dating, I'm not going to swipe on that person. I'm not going to want to interact, even if they like super like me or whatever it is they do on the different apps, they ping me, whatever. I'm not going to interact with that because, like, to me, that's like a giant red flag. So, not sure what's going on there, but that could be a very strong possibility. I would love to see a study maybe with like a daily log or a weekly log or some kind of like non-invasive, non-intrusive, I don't know, like, I don't know how you would keep, like, the data from the app, like, secure while, like, actively collecting it on a daily basis, but if somebody could be smart enough to figure out how to collect that app usage data in, like, a secure way for research, I think that could be very telling and very interesting. I also think it would be really interesting to analyze the textual content of people's bios and their messages because, as we saw, incels are more likely to have a bio than non-incels are. But what is in that bio? Because if you have a bio, but it's like one message and it's like, I don't really want to be here, like, that's not really going to be appealing to people. So, like, how long are the bios? What kind of information do they contain? What do they talk about? I'm making a comparison there in terms of, like, keywords or subjects. I think that could be really telling in the same way that it was really telling to see that incels were so much less likely to have pictures with other people, with friends, in their profiles. Because I imagine that probably carries over into the textual part of these interactions, or how they talk to people in terms of like sending messages. What does that look like? That could also be very telling as well. And like, as far as the profile picture, like taking pictures of people, I worry that that's going to be interpreted like, oh, bro, women love to see you hanging out with your bros, dude. Like, you're going to be 500% more successful with women if you just put a picture, like, just Photoshop yourself into a picture with some other dudes, guys. Like, it just totally works, man. Like, it's going to, like, I don't, that's the wrong lesson to take away from that. It's just, like, women like seeing you around other people. Like, I don't think that's what's happening there. I think it's more an indicator of your ability to interact with other people, have social connections, have healthy relationships, have friendships in real life outside of like individual dating. Because I think it's a lot harder to have like healthy dating when you don't have any other relationships at all. Like, you don't have friends, you don't like, you're not close with your family, none of that stuff. Like, you don't have anyone else. Putting all of that pressure onto a single relationship and you haven't really intimately interacted with another human being outside of the internet in like months or years, it's going to be a turnoff for a lot of people. And it's going to be a very, very, very high bar to be able to get over in terms of getting to success if you just don't have practice having in-person, real-life interactions with friendly people that you know that you care about and that know you and care about you in turn. And I want to point out that doing more research here is not necessarily a pure, universal good thing, because we have to remember people that are incels, manosphere people, oftentimes, most of the time, they don't like women, and oftentimes they also mean them harm. And so if we're giving them more information about like what to put in a profile, what works, what doesn't, we are giving them more information to be able to game the system in a very cynical way. And I know from my research looking at red pillars, they are very willing to do nice things very cynically for malintent. And I want to be careful about not giving people who don't mean well more information to be able to hide more easily amongst more reasonable non-women hating profiles on dating apps. And I mean, it's going to happen kind of regardless. That's kind of how the whole ecosystem supports itself, is like selling information to other men about like how to date women successfully and have a good dating profile and talk to women and pick up women. Like, it's all about finding women. And so they're already going to probably have iterated through a lot of this, but maybe just not putting scientific research in their hands for bad purposes. Like, maybe avoiding that would be a good thing to do. Like, you know, like when I was looking up this research myself, like I found stories about incels that, for example, do like Chad fishing, which is their idea of revenge against women, where they catfish women, sometimes the same woman repeatedly on purpose, with profile pictures that are made from social media accounts of like TikTokers or famous people or just like handsome people online. And then like they just do it to make fun of women and to get back at them and stand them up. And like it's really, really unkind and really bad. And I don't want to give them more ability to do that more easily than some of them are already able to do. But maybe there's a possible silver lining that pointing out, hey, like your profile isn't successful because you seem really sad. Like, genuinely, do you need help? Like, maybe that would actually help somebody. Or pointing out, hey, like women don't like you because your profile just screams anger problems. Like, maybe that would help. Maybe that would be the wake-up call somebody needs to be able to go, oh my God, like, this is so obvious to everyone else. I'm never going to find a girlfriend or a wife if I don't, like, shape up. Like, I do need to actually change. And maybe that's naive hope on my part that some people will do that. I think it's possible. Some people will see that information and act on it with kindness and good intention for themselves and not to hurt other people. But, you know, who knows, really? I'm not in those communities enough to definitively say. And I think also, obviously, one big thing with this research is that incels are very hard to contact. They do not like society and mainstream media and journalists and like big institutions that they see as like supporting women and feminism and like leading to their suffering and to their downfall. Like, the best way to do a study about this would be like literally if like Jordan Peterson put his name on it, and then maybe we would get more survey participants, because only 38 is like a really small number. I'd want to see like maybe more of like a cross country, multiple universities, multiple areas of the country, like hundreds of people would be great. But you know, when it comes to research, we could always be asking for more. We're not necessarily going to get more. So it is my dream at least. But I do want to say as a final note here that for incels, if any of you are watching for some reason, or just in general, like so people know this, it is not impossible to like come back from being an incel. I know people in my personal life that when they were teenagers, usually they're older, so they weren't around when like incel was like a really big thing, but they were at least going towards that ideology of like manosphere stuff, red pill stuff, incel stuff, and they were feeling really, really down about themselves. They had a lot of mental health issues, they had self-esteem issues, and they were able to pull themselves away from that and realize it wasn't working for them, and they didn't have to act that way, and that those things were actually true about women, and it didn't lead them to successful relationships. And now they have relationships and marriages and families that are healthy and successful and positive, and they were able to step back from like becoming a full-fledged like black pill like incel person or like a hardcore red pillar, because they were able to snap out of it in time to be able to readjust and be able to have a more positive life. So, incels and manosphere folk just at large are not without hope. I think knowing what research says like this is very important, and maybe it helps you all be more informed about your dating decisions and what you look for in dating apps, and and just all that stuff. I would love to know your thoughts in a comment down below about this study, about incels, about research like this. If there's any other things you would want to know about in terms of like kink research or things about the BDSM community in research and in literature, I would love to talk more about all of that. If you do this already, please do subscribe because I make videos twice a week about all sorts of different kink and BDSM related topics, as well as dating and relationship topics like this video here. And also, if you want to support what I do, the best you can do that is with Patreon. A link to that will be down below. If you do already support me over there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.